My goal for the next 10 minutes is to kickstart our conversation today on the importance of IP strategy and protection and share a first glimpse into the ElevateIP program. But before I begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge our ElevateIP government partner, Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada, and also our project partners, Invest Ottawa and North Forge. It's been a pleasure to work with you on ElevateIP, and we appreciate the opportunity to deliver this important program. So, according to the World Intellectual Property Organization's Global Innovation Index, Canada ranked 9th on innovation inputs, but 20th on innovation outputs. This means that Canada invests in innovation, but does not see as many returns in terms of IP creation and protection and business and technology-related outcomes. In addition, globally, Canada lags on IP education capacity. So given this, developing and protecting IP is a core part of Canada's innovation strategy. There is increasing complexity and pace of technological change that is resulting in rapidly increasing amounts of available IP data. And interestingly enough, AI technology has a significant share of the increase in IP. Canada has not kept pace with the rising global demand for IP rights. What this means is Canada needs to catch up to ensure we have our share of the economic benefit, and we need to protect our innovation assets in order to succeed in an innovation economy. So as Naomi already noted, intellectual property is one of the most important assets of the digital age. However, Canada has a massive knowledge gap when it comes to IP business strategy and implementation. And we're behind the international average for companies leveraging, managing, and supporting IP. So as you can see, only 14% of Canadian companies performing research and development hold or use patents. Only 17% of companies say IP protection is needed. And only 9% of innovative companies say they have an IP strategy. Canadian businesses struggle with fast and easy access to the tools and resources to adequately protect IP and capitalize on it. And yet, companies owning IP are 60% more likely to be high growth. Canadian small and medium-sized businesses are patenting at a lower rate than companies with more than 500 employees. Research shows that companies with intellectual property rights have higher revenue per employee than those that have no IP rights. Large companies are also more cognizant of the value of their IP, but we know that SMEs may lose out because they often don't know what their IP is, how to protect it, and leverage it to its full effect. Given there are almost 1.2 million SMEs in Canada, there is a huge untapped potential. So what we know is having an IP strategy to protect and leverage intangible assets is critically important to the growth and competitiveness of startups. What we also know is failure to develop an IP strategy and protect IP rights early may result in challenges and can impact a startup's growth. An IP strategy can help a startup be more innovative, export more, enjoy higher growth, and create better jobs. Ensuring innovators have the IP knowledge they need to succeed is critical, as IP that is not fully exploited is a missed opportunity for growth, which could limit further investment in innovation. So the key challenges to startups securing IP are complexity, time, lack of understanding, lack of IP strategy, and the cost. And so knowing this, how can ElevateIP help? So we know that smart strategic IP management is a key ingredient for startups' early growth and competitiveness, and that protecting IP can help attract investors, fend off competitors, and expand their market. A good IP strategy allows startups to protect ideas and innovation, monitor the field for challengers, and look for new opportunities to apply its assets. And experienced investors often look for companies that have an IP strategy in place. A solid IP plan builds and retains value in your company and can lead to a better payoff down the road, which brings us to ElevateIP. So ElevateIP is a national program, a national intellectual property strategy that was launched in 2018 by the Government of Canada to continue to further support Canadian innovators, startups, and technology-intensive businesses. The program itself was announced in the federal budget in 2021 and is being led by our federal partners at Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada. And the goal of ElevateIP is to provide business accelerators and incubators with the tools that startups need to understand, strategically manage, and then leverage their IP. So Communitech is privileged to be one of 5 ElevateIP recipient organizations in Canada. And we're also very privileged to work with our project partners, North Forge and Invest Ottawa. Together, we are collaborating to develop a 3-tiered program for startups in Ontario, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan. Our goal is to deliver a consistent program approach to help startups understand how IP can enable them to grow and scale. In addition, we'll aim to remove barriers and increase accessibility to support and resources, and will help startups develop and pursue IP strategies that enable commercialization and drive their growth. In addition to our collaboration, we also participate on the National ElevateIP All-Recipient Committee to share program ideas and lessons learned, along with identifying ways that we can work together across the country. So ElevateIP will leverage the existing business accelerator and incubator network to provide targeted IP supports to startups as a complement to their existing suite of services, with the goal to help increase the IP capacity in the ecosystem. So we'll do this by enabling IP education for BAIs and their startups, facilitating the exchange of best practices and encouraging collaboration, providing greater access to IP advice and support, and enabling BAIs to provide supports that are customized to the startups to help them secure and maintain IP rights while enabling longer-term IP benefits to be delivered throughout the BAI ecosystem. So the ElevateIP program is delivered through 3 tiers of activities. The IP education and awareness tier will focus on increasing capacity within the BAI ecosystem to support startups through IP education. This will include promoting and facilitating access to national, provincial, and regional IP resources via a new online ElevateIP portal. Portal will offer centralized access to informational resources, workshops, programs, and peer-to-peer learning to help increase the understanding of the use and value of IP. The goal with this tier is to support startups that are new to IP and provide foundational knowledge, along with customized training for underrepresented or specialized groups, industries, or sectors. The Developing IP Strategies tier is specific for startups at a stage where coaching, resources, and legal advice are needed to develop a sound IP strategy. To do so, the startup will be connected with an IP service provider or IP expert who will provide coaching and information to help startups access the right resources required to develop these strategies. In addition, activities within this pillar will also enable BAIs to deliver IP supports themselves if they don't do so already, via training modules, train the trainer workshops, and opportunities to share best practices with their peers. And finally, the Implementing IP Strategies tier will provide financial support and expertise to startups that are implementation ready and at a stage where that support is required to execute on an IP strategy to pursue specific types of intellectual property protection, license, or rights agreement. In this tier, the startup is connected with an IP service provider who will guide them through the process of undertaking strategic and formal IP protection. So today, I'm very excited to announce the formal launch of the ElevateIP program in Ontario, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan. Startups in these provinces can apply to the ElevateIP program through a new online portal. The portal will be developed in stages to implement additional functionality over time and will provide startups with access to general information, educational resources, rosters of professionals, programs, services, and additional supports, and permit visitors to complete program applications. So startups can apply for the ElevateIP program if they are headquartered in Ontario, Manitoba, or Saskatchewan. They are a Canadian-controlled private corporation which owns or has exclusive rights to the IP looking to be protected and has less than 500 full-time employees. ElevateIP offers resources and support of up to $100,000 to develop and implement an IP strategy, and a co-investment by the startup is required for Tier 3 implementation services. In addition, funding support is not provided directly to startups and will be allocated based on services provided through a service provider or expert. Whatever stage you're at in the startup process, we have IP resources and a network of business accelerators and incubators and service providers that can help. Program information is available through Communitech, InvestOttawa, and North Forge. And the process to apply for ElevateIP begins with registering and completing a profile on the program portal. So if you are a startup, BAI, or service provider and would like to learn more about ElevateIP, please connect with us using this QR code. So thank you again for joining us today. We have some great panelists and content over the next 60 minutes. Thanks in advance to all of those that are contributing to our launch event. And to close, I once again share our gratitude for our project partners, InvestOttawa and North Forge, and our government partner, Innovation Science and Economic Development Canada. Thanks, everyone.
So that was a great presentation by Beth to sort of set the stage in terms of what we're dealing with here in Canada, that we have a bit of an IP deficit going on. And to explain why that is, I just wanted to highlight a few things through some charts for folks. So, welcome to the intangibles economy. If we look back 50 years ago, this really didn't matter. And so this sort of explains how we got to where we are today. But today, if you look, for example, at the S&P 500, and this chart is a little bit lagging, but now it's around the 93%. The value in companies is really in the intangible assets. And so what we mean by that is the intellectual property and the data and all of those intangibles, the know-how that goes in. So we're not counting bales of hay and cars on a parking lot. We're really looking at the intangible value that resides in the company. And so if we look at the global trends, IP is just gaining importance in terms of these intellectual property rights that companies are acquiring. So these assets of the business are important, and globally, they are just increasing in importance. So if you look at this chart, the gray and the orange line shows patent filings, how they've increased, and utility models, which is a form of patent, very strategic form of patent that can be used in China and other places, gone from 3 million to 6 million filings annually. And designs, which protect industrial products, the form and shape of those, has gone from 500,000 annually to 1.5 million currently. So just to give you a sense of the trends. And then also to understand that Canada is really lagging. So when we look at, for example, patent applications, international patent applications, and that would be PCT applications, China now has surpassed the US in terms of filing. So they're not just filing nationally in China, but they're filing internationally. And Canada has been decreasing in terms of its international patent filing. So we need to turn that ship around. And then finally, this is the most important slide I want to share with you. And this was a big study done in Europe, and again, supported by data here done in Canada. And Beth touched on this earlier, which is that small, medium-sized companies that have at least one registered IP right, so registered trademark or patent or registered design, earn 55% more revenue per employee than a company that does not. And SMEs that own both a patent and a registered trademark generate 75% more revenue and grow faster. So this leads me into our discussion with our panelists today in terms of driving value for businesses and really helping our Canadian SMEs grow and export and succeed. So maybe over to Julia, because you've had a long history in Canadian industry on the tech side. And if you give us a little bit background on you and the importance of an IP strategy going back to your days in industry and now also as an investor as well.
That'd be great. Thank you, Natalie. And thank you for those numbers to kick things off. And I hope my history isn't too long, but I will start in the 1990s. So yes, it is. But I really, myself, I'm an electrical engineer by trade and got involved in semiconductors here in Canada. First of all with LSI Logic, but then helped co-found a company called Chipworks in 1994. And we fairly early on were starting to work with intellectual property groups and R&D groups around the world. And electronics and semiconductor firms in Asia, US, and Europe. And that the focus was originally supporting R&D groups, but as the interest in patents increased, and there were licensing negotiations between semiconductor companies, these big companies were trying to figure out what they had. They didn't actually know many times what they had. They'd been patenting and patenting. And we got involved in helping them identify their patents of value. I have Mike McLean here too. I can't possibly not note that Tech Insights was our largest competitor, and so Mike and I used to meet around the world, and more often than we met in Ottawa, so that we could talk about the ecosystem a little bit carefully, since we were competitors. But we learned as Canadians that there was much more focus on patents all around the world than there was right in Canada. And literally, I know Chipworks numbers were 95% plus export all our services and products around the world. And at the beginning, it was closer to 98%. So, I actually got introduced to patents by patenting, and fairly early on as a member and running the R&D group at Chipworks, we started to go through the patenting system, and I learned about not only the costs from a out-of-pocket costs, but the costs in time. It is not an easy process to go through, and you really need to be able to explain in detail to someone, hopefully with a background in your area, a patent agent, about what this invention is and why it's different, and in order to kick off this process and start to make file patents in various countries. So it was a good learning, and then being exposed to what was happening internationally. Chipworks took the time to start to think about what we should be doing more internally beyond that first patent. One of the things that we did well right from the beginning is actually start to make sure all our contractors and employees had the right IP agreements to protect and retain Chipworks IP rights. We also learned to start talking about the difference between patents and trade secrets, and whether or not we wanted to keep some as trade secrets and patent others. So we took the time to have discussions, and this is a lot of what the IP strategy focus is about. Is really thinking that through, and for your particular business, what is important going forward. Because for Chipworks, we had a lab, and that lab not many people got into, and so we could use trade secrets within the lab for our particular chemicals for doing various parts of the work we do. But other things that were more public, well, maybe that was better to patent. So we had to go through that kind of discussion. I learned a lot through this process at Chipworks, and one of the most valuable things we did was actually just take the time to bring people together that were innovative and really try and talk through what we were creating. And then taking the time to see what your competitors are doing. A very important step that you can do right from the beginning, and can be part of your IP strategy as well. But now, after selling the company and to Tech Insights, and handing all that off to Mike at the time, amongst others, I was able to start working with entrepreneurs at Invest Ottawa initially, and eventually do some angel investing through Capital Angel Network, and help create an organization called SheBoot. And all of those gave me a lot of exposure to early stage startups and their struggles with lack of funds, but the need to create a competitive moat that makes them, in many cases, more interesting to investors going forward and valuable. And so, for some sectors, like medtech and hard tech, I find it very difficult to consider investing if there isn't some type of intellectual property and a good understanding of intellectual property, it doesn't have to be granted, but it should be thought through, understood, and some filings, because there is such a long runway to a return in those sectors, and investors want to know that, that there's not only a competitive moat, but it's a strong competitive moat that is protected by the patents. So it's at SheBoot. I've had the wonderful opportunity to bring people like Natalie Rafoul and Jen Raoul in to do intellectual property workshops. We do that because we know for our founders, which are women tech entrepreneurs that are trying to scale their businesses and get investment ready, we know how critical it is that they understand and can respond to questions around intellectual property and really be able to prove to future investors that they've thought it through and understand what's right for their business. So takeaway, think about your intellectual properties agreements with all your employees, and take a look and use some of these services that we have available today, like ElevateIP.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's a great segue to introduce Jen Harper, who's the CEO and founder of Cheekbone Beauty, and to talk about a little bit about, the challenges you face. So, I mean, you're on the company side of things currently in it. What's keeping you up in terms of building an IP strategy? And it's something that I know you're going to continually keep building, and maybe some of the learnings already based on, what you guys have been doing over the last few years.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge, as mentioned, is always capital. This is a really expensive part of the business where you don't see the return for quite some time in many cases. And so, of course, the funding it has been a challenge. We've been very grateful to have the support of IRAP on many of our projects along the way, and also our current investor supporting our intellectual property plans and strategy. I think as a small business, it's something that, I was really grateful for the relationship with my representative from IRAP in the early days of building Cheekbone, and really recognizing and being mentored down the path of really having a huge differentiating factor from what a lot of brands, especially in the beauty space. This industry is captivating to investors because our margins are so incredible, but at the same time, it's an extremely, extremely competitive space. And so to win here, you have to have something really unique in the marketplace. And so with that recognition early on, I often say I have no business being in this industry just because I didn't come from it. But what also gave me an advantage is seeing what was missing. And we were really looking at this idea of sustainability and creating new products and this whole idea of a circular economy. And so the projects we're working on for sure meet a lot of the basic foundations of the brand that we're trying to build. And I think it will always be a heavy lift to continue to work on these projects, but anyone that we sit down at a table with and start to discuss our plans and our vision for the future and what we're trying to work on and create, and how that will truly set us apart from what everyone else is doing in this marketplace. Like as an indie beauty brand, it's not very common that you build your own lab and hire your own team of people in science to help work on these projects. And it's something we did in the early days because we know that that's going to create value and help us with the long-term vision of the company.
That's great. That's great, Jen. So maybe segueing over to Mike as the CEO of IEC, the Innovation Asset Collective, and you've been around for now a few years. Maybe talk about your background coming from industry. I know Julia's highlighted that a little bit in terms of, and just to illustrate for folks too, I mean, right here out of Ottawa, we had two global powerhouses in their space. They weren't just two small Canadian companies. I mean, they were the world leading companies in this area and continue to this day. So this was, and this was based on a large part in the IP dominance that you had. So over to you, Mike.
Thanks, Natalie. Yes, hi, everyone. I'm Mike McLean. I'm the CEO at the Innovation Asset Collective. Similar to Julia, started my my career in industry in the tech field in Ottawa, working for a company called Tech Insights, a direct competitor with Chipworks for a number of years, working to reverse engineer semiconductor and electronics products and sell that to companies looking to benchmark their technologies against competition or to gather evidence of patent infringement and identify value within their patent portfolios. I led the IP practice there for roughly 15 years and really got to learn how large companies aggressively use their IP portfolios to either drive additional revenue streams into their businesses or to aggressively discourage other players from entering their markets and to really enhance their competitiveness in those spaces. Balance that perspective from sort of the large multinational activity with, as Julia said, kind of growing a small to medium-sized business in Canada, understanding the technology we're developing, the competitive environment we were facing, how to build out an IP position that can help that business grow and evolve was a great learning experience. So I've taken sort of those two sets of knowledge with me and now lead the Innovation Asset Collective, which is a not-for-profit funded by the federal government. Similar to ElevateIP, it's a key part of the federal IP strategy that was launched in 2019. IEC got its start late that year and has been actively growing ever since. Our mandate is to improve the capacity of Canadian clean tech companies to implement IP strategies that create global business advantage and increase their freedom to operate by mitigating risk that could limit their access to those markets. On the capacity building front, we have two programs that support that effort. The first is an education program. So we're working to educate business leaders, the innovators and entrepreneurs that are leading SMEs within this country, helping them understand how to establish IP strategies and how to establish the practices within their businesses that are going to make those strategies more productive. We are not replacing the great sort of cadre of service providers that are out there supporting those countries actually executing on those pieces, but want to really help the business leaders understand and work more effectively with those firms. The second part of our capacity building piece is a funding initiative. We really feel that companies need to practice these activities on a regular basis. So we provide them with funding so they can undertake IP-related activities. Those are expensive in many cases, and they need help financially to do that. Obviously, the ElevateIP program, a lot of similar pieces, and we're partnered with many of the funded accelerators to help them implement those pieces with the work we've already done. The second part of our mandate is increasing the freedom to operate for Canadian SMEs. And this typically is where our companies, as they evolve and start to grow, where they're going to take advantage of these programs more as they mature. So we're building a patent portfolio of our own that our member companies can access when they face an assertion from a large multinational. If they're having to deal with that litigation or just assertion threat, they may not have a patent portfolio of their own that's fully developed and self-sustaining. So we are out buying patents in the open market that we can transfer to members and give them assets that they can leverage. That activity also requires money to fund. They need to pay for lawyers, pay for advisors to work through those types of issues. So we're offering an IP insurance package to help address that risk management piece. So we provide our full members with $1 million of defensive coverage and $500,000 of offensive coverage to help them offset those costs and the ability to supplement that at their own cost above that base level. And then the final piece is IP intelligence, doing research into clean tech markets and the patent holdings in those spaces so that our member companies can help have that data as they build their own businesses and can make better informed decisions. All of that really goes into enhancing the competitiveness of Canadian companies. And we can talk, I think, as the session goes on, of some of the things we've learned in executing over the last 3 years. And where some of the gaps are and where some of the successes have been.
That's great, Mike. Super. So I think at this point, we could open it up to some questions. There are quite a few already sort of in the open question area, but they're a little bit more general. I'm wondering if one of you can maybe handle this patent broker question. Do you have experience with patent brokers? But then also there's a question along the lines, I mean, I think ElevateIP should really answer these questions about what we can do for companies, let's say with 20 patents in multiple jurisdictions. But maybe we could tackle that. And then, somebody wants some definitions around, what is intellectual property, trademarks versus copyright versus Creative Commons. I don't know if there's any other questions along those lines. Maybe,
you want me to start on the patent broker one, Mike?
Yeah, why don't you tackle that?
Sure, jump in.
Well, it's just there are patent brokers and there are patent brokers, so they're mostly working on some sort of commission basis now, I would say, I would if you have interest by one, I would make sure that you talk to a few others. We have some Canadian patent brokers as well that might be able to help. So just be cautious, and there's still a lot around, Mike, isn't there? I mean, I haven't talked to any in a while, but
yeah, we're actively buying patents. So we've seen 80 to 90 active brokers kind of in our space. So there are a lot of them out there. The good ones add significant value, very similar to a real estate broker or real estate agent, right? They're promoting the intellectual property that they have and trying to find interested parties. And really depends if you're being contacted as a potential seller of IP or as a potential buyer. Most of those, vast majority, are working on some sort of commission basis, again, similar to a real estate agent. Those percentages typically range from 10 to 20%, depending on how much they're going to invest in promoting the portfolio. Right? Are they going to develop evidence of use? Are they going to do studies into exposed revenue streams and put together sort of financial models that can help support the value of a sale? As a seller, you need to ask those questions and understand what's being done to justify the commission that they may be requesting. As a buyer, again, you're going to be wanting to understand what information they can provide to enable your due diligence and make your buying process more streamlined. So many of them add significant value to the transaction market. There are others out there just looking to cut quick deals and operate more on volume than quality. So you really need to assess that carefully.
That's great. Can we talk a little? There's a question about IP valuation. I think, I wanted to talk a little bit about the blind spots, maybe that, you, Julia, and Mike see in terms of recurring blind spots with our companies. And that maybe ties in also to IP valuation, I think. So, and how we can sort of de-risk companies and help them on that side of it. So maybe over to you, Julia. And then I've got a question for you, Jen, too.
I sure, and I get again. I think Mike will add a lot more to this as well too. In valuing IP, I'll do it from an investor standpoint because that's new to me. In the old days, I would say you don't really know the value of a patent until you have proven that others use it, which is one of the reasons why Tech Insights and Chipworks existed, because we could provide those kind of proof packages that showed one or more other companies were using the invention. That's the ultimate way to value a patent. And I'm only talking about patents. In terms of patents and investors, they actually see patents as a way to de-risk their investment. Because, and I hate to say this, but they see it as a way, if it's a really good patent, and, great, that supports the growth of the company. But if the company fails, there is a possibility there's some leftover value by that patent and either licensing or selling that patent in the future. So that's the way investors are thinking of it, whether it's real, that, whether it's not easy selling patents, and as we talked about a little bit too. And so, it's one approach going forward.
Yeah, valuing IP is part art, part science. There are some defined methodologies, looking at displaced profits, looking at cost to sort of build an alternative technology, but also potential royalty streams if there are infringing products, and what are typical royalty rates, and what's the exposed revenue in those spaces. So there are experts in that field that can deploy those methodologies. Valuing an individual right, like a single patent, is risky for a few reasons. Right, IP is all about it's a property right, so there are boundaries around what that property is, and with IP, those boundaries can be a bit fuzzy and up to determination. Now, experts again can help you determine that. The other part is the validity of the right, and in today's environment, the validity is quite frequently challenged. So when we talk to companies about creating value, it's about creating a portfolio of rights, right? So you're diversifying your risk by creating a set of patents, but also other forms of IP, trade secrets, copyrights. That portfolio creates a lattice effect where each piece supports each other and creates more significant value than any individual right on its own. So if you have a portfolio of rights, I think you're going to see more value placed on that than an individual right. And you may not be there yet as an early stage company. You may have a single provisional patent filed or a set of trade secrets documented. Does your strategy dictate a plan to kind of build that over time? And does that strategy consider your competitive environment and the types of IP positions others in that environment are currently holding or likely to be building? Right? And if you can speak to those pieces, again, I think that lends a lot of credence to the value of your business as a whole and the IP position that's part of that business.
That's great.
Can I grab the assignment one?
The assignment one?
Yeah. If I start that one, because I touched on it earlier, suggestions for early stage startups and regarding IP assignment. Yes, do it, and do it early and start early, and with every one of the contractors and employees you're working with, because it will make a difference later on when you are looking for funding. It's not the first thing that comes up when you're talking to investors, but when they start looking at your data room and trying to see how well protected you are from an intellectual property standpoint, they're going to want to see that you have taken the time to gather the IP assignments to ensure that your company owns the inventions of the contractor's employees going forward.
Yeah. One thing people are asking questions about, the balance between trade secrets and especially in the software realm, which 70% of patent filings now are in the software space. So, and that's in the millions. Just keep in mind there's churn, right? So just remember that the average time that someone's going to stay with your company is 4 years. You have to expect they're going to end up at your competitor. They're going to take that know-how and the trade secrets, and doesn't matter how good that confidentiality agreement is, to your competitor within 4 years. So yes, trade secrets are good, but you don't know whether you have a trade secret until a court tells you that, yes, you have an enforceable trade secret. So you have to, good companies, strong companies take a balanced approach to what types of IP they use. They use trade secrets, they use patents, they use defensive publication, like it is a whole strategy. And so I guess over to Jen, really, because I want to hear from you also, like, what is keeping you up at night then in terms of like, what do you need to know? What's going to help you now in the next little while as a company?
I think for us, it's absolutely how we're going to fund all of these. Yeah, I'm the entrepreneur that has all the ideas, right, and constantly tossing hundreds of them at my team regularly.
Right.
How do we fund the ones that matter or are going to work? And so those are the questions that keep me up at night.
Well, it's I mean, we're about to leave. So it is the quality of the IP. It's not about, we're not telling companies here to go start filing like crazy. It really be very careful about what you're protecting, what you're investing in. And maybe you have a US only strategy. Maybe you're only filing patents in the US to start. That's fine. But just understand why. I mean, I see these companies are filing Canada, and that's the only place they file. To grow a business in Canada, you need to export. So Canadian patents, Canadian trademarks are not really your big problem. You need protection in the markets where you're going to do business, where you're going to drive revenue. So that really keep your eye on the prize. The US patent, the European patent, the Chinese patent, those are going to be more important potentially, most likely, unless you're talking about hockey equipment or salmon fishing or something. You're really going to be looking at IP assets outside the country. So just keep that in mind and be selective, and it's quality. It's really about the quality of those assets. So I'll just leave on that note. Thank you so much, Mike, Julia, Jen. We just didn't have enough time. We could talk for hours.
I know. I had a great summary though, Natalie. Thank you.
Thanks, Saram.
Good afternoon, everybody. Happy American Turkey and Football Day to everyone, and a big thank you for joining us today. I'm Azar Janjua. I work with Communitech. A few years back, along with Alexis Black, Natalie Giroux, Peter Cowan, and Jim Hinton, we delivered Communitech's Hive IP courses to early stage founders, which became the precursor for ElevateIP. So it's so exciting to be part of this launch event after so many years of so many people's hard work. My day job, what I do every day, is I lead the Communitech Outpost team, and our mission is to help Canadian founders from coast to coast make their global expansion plans a reality. But 4 years ago, we launched a successful employer of record service focused on the specific needs of Canadian businesses looking to do business and grow revenue abroad. So we're not able to only unlock remote talent, but also remove the barriers of entry into any major global sales market. So we want to help our companies create outposts in Boston, Barcelona, Brisbane, anywhere in the world within 2 weeks at an eighth of the usual cost. So that's me. Let's dive in and get to know our special guests. So I think to start, I'd like to start by asking our panelists to introduce themselves. Leif, let's start with you. Maybe help us understand what you do and the types of companies or verticals that you target as an investor.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do that. And nice to be here. Thanks for having me. And Azure, love the fireplace background. It's very soothing to see. So I'm a private equity investor. I do minority investments in technology businesses across a whole number of industries. Really, the only common thread across the things that we at Mavericks invest in is that there's some level of disruption happening within the company. That could be in financial services, it could be in healthcare, it could be in consumer and retail, supply chain and logistics, or any host of smart cities and enterprise software. So a pretty wide gamut. I'm excited to talk about how we look at intellectual property a little differently across all of those areas. I started my career as a computer engineer. I went to the Waterloo to study that, and back then the coolest thing I could think of was to own a patent. And so this topic is very near and dear to my heart.
Fantastic. And Danielle, tell us your story.
Absolutely, and absolutely delighted to be here with my fellow panelist Leif, and to be invited by Communitech, where I started my career founding Fierce Founders almost a decade ago, because we're on the precipice of 2024. And so I actually had my own company through the Laurier Startup Fund, and I was able to build out that patented technology over 4.5 years. So it's not always a story I share, but happy to share it because it really inspired my work with female founders. And I now have a fund called Phoenix Fire, where I'm the general partner, as well as the Firehood, which is a broader angel network of investors across Canada. And I'm particularly excited to talk about intellectual property today because a decade ago it really was a different landscape. And it was just the beginning of founders thinking about their IP. And it's really, I've seen such a huge shift into a heightened consciousness about the importance of protecting innovation through robust IP strategies. So I'm glad we're here, and thank you to ElevateIP.
So first question, Danielle, I'll ask you the question first. So as an investor, it's common for companies that are pitching you to provide you information and create a data room for you. So when you're making that assessment of a company you want to invest in or your partners want to invest in, what is your checklist for due diligence for specifically intellectual property? What key elements do you look for and what cannot be overlooked?
Really important question. And there's kind of like a high level answer for some of the maybe earlier stage companies and a deeper dive answer, along with the types of questions that would be asked per item. But overall, when it comes to due diligence on intellectual property, my checklist is first and foremost understanding the strategic use of IP to protect and propel the products. So I'll delve into more how is that aligned to, for example, jurisdictions to ensure IP protections align with your market expansion plans. So is what you're saying to me aligning with what I'm seeing in your data room? You know, we're looking as investors to identify and address any existing or potential impediments to this IP strategy. We'd be assessing the level of internal and external IP support. So we've got a lot of specialists on the call. I would tap into them. We can talk about budgets and how to scrutinize those to ensure that it's realistic and aligned with the overall business plan. I do a thorough examination of patents, ownership, prosecution status, public disclosures, trade secrets, lots on competitors, especially for early stage startups, to see that they've actually done their research. And kind of that as a whole creates the comprehensive checklist. But each of these elements is vital to kind of that overall due diligence and can't be overlooked. And so I would say, if you're thinking about it, like for founders, just thinking about your business objectives, like have you thought about how you're strategically using IP for your products and services? The jurisdictions, again, do those align with what you're pitching on your deck? Any impediments, any advisory support that you have that can showcase that you're kind of managing this and you've got someone who can help you navigate anything that comes up. And then again, just scrutinizing every area of the patents, prosecution, disclosures, trademarks to make sure that those areas you haven't taken any shortcuts. And overall, if I was going to make like an analogy, say your final exit is your big symphony orchestra event. The IP needs to be hitting the right pitch from the get-go. So if you think about it from that standpoint, you really don't want to see any red flags, and that can cause a lot of concerns where investors are more likely to walk away.
Thank you. Leith, do you follow the same approach or do you do something a little bit different?
Yeah, I really like what Danielle said there about the consistency between the business model and the intellectual property strategy. I hadn't really thought of it that way, but it's absolutely right. You want those things to be in tune with each other. Just to help us kind of think about it, I find frameworks a little bit helpful because it's not the same cookie cutter answer for each business, right? So the way I would think about it is, what kind of business, what industry are you in? Are you software, biotech, hardware, or material sciences? Across these kind of four general areas, there's a different checklist to the extent there ever is one. And then when you're thinking about the categories of intellectual property, or let's think about patents, trade secrets, but also we've heard those two before, but there's also an element of trade craft as distinct from trade secret, which is just how you prevent other people from copying the hardest part of what you built. And so, the intersection of all these things will be a little different depending on the industry that you're working in. I'd say, oftentimes when we're going through an investment, the lawyers that we're working with are tasked with reviewing that intellectual property. And more often than not, especially if we're talking about a software business, the investor doesn't get as in the weeds on that. Not the case in biotech, hardware, and material sciences, and we could talk about why. But the lawyers are going to be looking for, do you actually own the IP that you need? Were there any issues and were they filed properly? And is everything there that, the entrepreneur said is actually there? But happy to kind of dive into any of these points.
Well, then I wonder, so were there any times, Elliot, and I'll kind of ask you the question first. Did any deals not happen, or did you ever have to walk away from a potential investment because of concerns with what you saw about that company's intellectual property?
Yeah, absolutely. It's happened. It's rare, but it does happen, right? So I'm thinking about a business right now where a lot of what they were selling had to do with a unique material, let's say. And the whole business model was predicated on, we've got this captive intellectual property, and we're going to be able to expand this internationally and grow at these amazing rates because we have this. And when we dove into the intellectual property, what we uncovered was that, it was more kind of trade secret than patents in it because it is a material, which is appropriate. The issue here was that they had contracted all the manufacturing out to another party. And so the trade secrets didn't actually exist within the business that was expecting this, ultra high valuation, predicated on the notion that they could have these amazing, revenues in the future. So you can see why that's the risk posture of that intellectual property strategy wasn't one that would be conducive to us putting in, $50 million. So yeah, it's happened. It's rare, but it happens.
There was a trade secret that then got told to other manufacturers, so the secret's out, right?
Yeah, actually, it's a good point. So if it was a plural manufacturers, so one thing you can do with trade secrets, or if you have some contract manufacturing, is you could divide, and this is more of the trade craft, you can divide elements of the manufacturing across a couple of different suppliers, and nobody actually knows the big picture. Nobody really knows what you're doing. And so nobody can actually quite replicate it. In this particular instance, somebody actually had one counterparty that they didn't own, that was manufacturing everything, had all the trade secrets, had all the know-how. And so inevitably, once this business got big enough that they knew what they were using it for, well, then they were just going to turn around and sell it to other people or create their own front-end company to do it. It was just a vulnerable position to be in for the business.
That's a great real-world example. Danielle, how about you? Were there any sort of potential investments where there were just too many red flags for you?
I mean, I would say quickly, because I'm an earlier stage investor, so more like angels, pre-seed, seed, you're looking at a lot of unresolved disputes between the owners of IP and the co-founders, or ongoing or beginnings of legal disputes related to IP. And so what I was surprised by in some of my experience in venture capital was that even though these things were coming up early on, there were still partners in the firms who were very keen on these companies. Just resolve it and then come back to us. So I think it's maybe a positive note to just say, there's still potential. So don't lose hope if suddenly something comes up with a conflict, ambiguity, or unclear ownership. You can still resolve it and move forward with your company.
So ultimately, if you as an investor or even if a director kind of sees a few gaps, you at least give the opportunity for them to go and resolve it before if there's another opportunity for another round of pitches once they've figured this stuff out, right?
Yeah, exactly. So come back to us and show us the results of your, dispute.
Do you give them a certain time frame?
I mean, if you take longer than 3 to 6 months, I would say, are you even fundraising? And it's essentially looking at it from a renewed standpoint entirely.
That's super helpful. And then I guess my next question is, so if a company is fortunate enough, founder is fortunate enough to receive funding from your investment, which is fantastic. Obviously, money has to be spent in certain places. And a lot of the times the drive is on building the product, getting it to market, selling it, marketing it, right? Those are important things that have to happen for a business to succeed. But then as the investor, how do you help your portfolio companies prioritize their spend on intellectual property strategy while maintaining, financial stability as well? So maybe Leith, I'll ask you that question first.
Yeah, happy to take this one. So if I can go back to my kind of four categories, software, biotech, hardware, material sciences, I'd say on the one extreme you've got biotech. Intellectual property is 100% as important as everything else you're doing. It should be priority number one. The enterprise value here is entirely predicated on a successful intellectual property. So you should be thinking about that first and foremost. Hardware, you should absolutely file patents. Realistically, you'll leave a few things off the application just so people can't copy it. You'll assume they'll try to reverse engineer it, but it's a little bit differently. Material sciences is mostly around trade secrets, like 5 people in the business know the formulation kind of thing. And by the way, I know Natalie mentioned that non-competes are not super strong. For those 5 people, you would want to make sure that you get a very good lawyer and make sure that each of them has a very strong non-compete and compensate them well relatively. And then on software, it's not often a place you would spend a lot of money in the early days. What happens in software is ultimately becomes more of a defensive measure. As you get big enough, the larger companies are going to come after you, and you want that defensive measure over there. It is not the first thing you do as an early stage founder, but as you grow, you certainly want to invest there. And by the way, as you grow, you want to leverage intellectual property to stop the other early upstarts from kind of taking your market share as well. So again, think of it more as a defensive measure that you can delay a little bit if resources are really tight in the early days.
Thank you. And then Danielle, sort of same question to you. How do you kind of help manage early stage investors and get them to kind of bucket their funds in a reasonable manner? And then I think along with that, do you guys consider the branding and the trademarks that are created when those companies are launching as well? I feel sometimes those can be overlooked because they're so busy on the product, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you want to, again, I like the defensive strategy proposition. I would say overall, I've seen a wide range of budgets. So my high level advice would be realistic and again, align to the plans. It's about, does everything come together? I'm hearing this pitch, I'm seeing this data room. Is it considered and thoughtful? Are they considering the type of tech, right, in the industry that they're in? And is it relevant to that? Do they have a proper strategy? Have they figured out the timing? Have they figured out their jurisdiction so that they're expanding in places where they have filed? And so overall, it's looking at what are they doing right now with their resources that's most applicable to their strategy? Are they focusing on their core innovation? Is it their actual core innovation that's prioritized and they're allocating those resources strategically? Are they collaborating and leveraging provisional patents effectively? Are they aligning their IP strategy with their business objectives? So I'll just kind of reiterate that all of that, it really depends on the early stage company, but they do tend to get caught up in what stage am I at? Am I investment ready? Do I have enough? Have I built out my MVP enough? Do I have enough of the patent? And I think it's more at my stage about really feeling confident in that nothing has gone wrong yet, and that there's some good strategies in place that will continue to put them on the right path, and that there's opportunity there in that market for ongoing IP strategy.
Fantastic. So I've been told we've got 2 minutes left, so I'll ask the one final question and let you maybe both jump in as you go. So kind of let's move to the end. We talked about investment and early stage, but the ultimate promised land is a company with profitability or a successful exit, either through an acquisition or an IPO. How do you think, but if a company gets it right, either at the beginning or through their growth process, how do you see intellectual property playing a role in a successful position in that sense?
Well, I'm happy to go first and let have the last word, because just have a quick analogy for those of you who love Titanic out there, that the IP is the heart of the ocean, right? It's that gem that attracts potential acquirers, right? They're going to build a whole ship and dig into the depths of the ocean to find it. And so really it can smooth out the entire process of negotiating and ensure a much more harmonious exit if there's nothing again, wrong in that process. And it's, I think, again, a lot of proactive alignment and communication on the strategy, so that those are, again, managed and there's a swift resolution, and it manages and minimizes the financial and reputational issues that could come up.
Yeah, and just to add to that, great answer. The won't be quite as illustrative as Danielle made it with the heart of the ocean, but I would just say we saw a chart earlier that talked about how intangible assets made up the majority of enterprise value, more so than tangible. So the means of production is no longer the factor; it is the intellectual property. So as you think about your exit strategy, you got to make sure you're thinking about how you're protecting the core value of the industry. Do you have the IP portfolio, the trade secrets, the trade craft, and the patents to ensure that the means of your company's production are protected? And then there's another element that we haven't talked about, and we don't have a lot of time to talk about it, but like how you can use IP to reduce to optimize taxes as well. Interestingly enough, and any of the policy nuts over here can opine on it, but you can transfer out intellectual property at really low value, rent it out to reduce into a lower tax jurisdiction, but that does not impact your ability to enforce that patent for a high value in a intellectual property suit. Like somehow these things happen at the same time. And companies should think about leveraging that.
That's a really great point. Thanks for making that. All right. So with that, I think we'll end this discussion. Thank you, Leif and Danielle, for joining me to have this chat. Thank you to our partners for inviting us. Now I think the Lions are playing the Packers. There's going to be a lot of trademarks on display. So technically, that's still going to be this thing going on. But I'll hand it over to you, Naomi. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us today.
As Naomi noted, I am an entertainment and media lawyer in Toronto, and while I have not had to draft a patent, file a trademark, or read IP case law for quite some time, my clients operate in an industry where there is no value beyond the IP. For my clients, business strategy is IP strategy, and it is a top priority for my clients to ensure that they have a comprehensive and responsive IP strategy implemented, as well as proper practices and procedures for identifying and capturing any and all intellectual property as it arises. I want to thank Natalie for those remarkably illustrative graphs, which demonstrates how intellectual property is increasingly driving the value of SMEs. And what I hope we can tease out in this session with the assistance of our wonderful panelists is what practices might these businesses implement to better capture their own IP, what the challenges are in doing so, and the ramifications that might have on an organization's overall business practices. So I'm going to turn first to Sean. Sean, last week during our discussion preparing for this panel, you noted that an intellectual property policy should be approached by entrepreneurs in the same terms as any other investment and similarly prioritized. In your experience, what steps can entrepreneurs take to ensure that they are adequately investing sufficient resources into developing their IP policy?
Sure. Thank you very much, Mitchell. So I would just say I come from a patent agent world, so I come mostly focused on the patent side, but just generally looking at the IP strategy, generally, it is the foundation. It's one of these things that you invest in early to protect your future success. It actually doesn't help you early on. And when you're looking at on the patent side and you're deciding whether to file a patent or keep something as a trade secret, you really need to start thinking about the patent as an investment, which means you need to build a business case, not just a patentability opinion. Typically, when I'm looking at a client's inventions or potential patents, generally the patentability of a particular invention in the product or service only makes up about a quarter of the score. Another quarter is really looking at the value of that exclusivity. So are there a lot of alternatives to that invention? Is there ways to design around it? In other words, is it detectable? In other words, is it enforceable easily? Those are things that can drive the value of that exclusivity. Then you have to look at the strategic fit within the company. So is this actually going to protect their key differentiator of their product or service? Or is it just a nice to have add-on feature? That's critical. And then the last quarter is really driving, is this an asset that could be sold through licensing or sale, or maybe packaged with trade secrets or with copyrights, and made into a valuable asset for the business. So looking at it as a business case rather than just a patentability opinion is a critical piece to any IP strategy early on.
That's really keen insight. The idea that you're like, the value of a patent isn't just, whether or not it's patentable, but like, what can you actually do with it, and how does that play into the wider business? The business strategy is key. Max, when BDC is looking to make an investment in an enterprise, are they undertaking a similar analysis as Sean? Like, what is BDC looking at when they're looking at the not only the IP policy and patentability of certain technologies, but how that plays into the business strategy for a business?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I think both Danielle and Julia made some very good points earlier in the presentation. Danielle talked a lot about the strategy and the focus that you have to put on the due diligence, looking at the geographic coverage, as well as Julia making some good points on the assignment. So I'll just go a little bit more into some of the areas that we look at specifically. We try to go a little bit more in depth, looking at maybe some of the stones that you don't typically turn over in the due diligence process. One of the areas we've particularly seen when looking at these companies, especially earlier stage ones, maybe that come out of a startup or incubator at a university, are some of the clauses that they may have with the assignments or license agreements that they have. They may have issues related to employment of dually employed individuals who may be employees at the university already, as researchers, professors who may have assignment responsibilities that are covered under one employment agreement. And the company may or may not have reviewed that with a certain level of diligence when they were hiring the individual, or may have just been overlooked. Another area is, I think, looking at the flexibility and the strategy that the company has really developed. Mike made some really good points earlier talking about, interlocking protection of different IP rights, looking how flexible that is if one right has been invalidated, or if coverage lapses or expires, or if a key person leaves a company for whatever reason and ends up going to a competitor, or they just lose the capability through one protection means. I think it's looking at a number of different avenues for protection, as well as trying to identify any vulnerabilities in the company's strategy.
So identifying that, I think the term that was used was lattice, which I thought was rather apt, because like Sean had said, the it's not just your business, or it's just not your patents, it's not just your IP, it's how it fits into your business strategy. And it's not just those formal protections that you can seek out, it's those we'll say like softer IP tools, right, such as trade secrets. So I was hoping to turn it over to Natalie or Peter, whoever feels like jumping in on this. When we're looking to create this lattice, how can we? What considerations should we be taking into account when we are deciding to pursue, or an enterprise is deciding to pursue, a patent versus trying to keep it in-house? I know someone had said, well, it was actually Natalie that was talking about, it was Natalie that was talking about how the average lifespan of someone working at a company is 4 years. So what considerations should a company be looking at when you're deciding to what degree you should be investing in patents versus trying to keep things undercover? What's the appropriate lattice design, and how do you come to that conclusion?
I think that one of the key consideration is the reverse engineering possibility, because if you can reverse engineer a product that's not illegal, there's a lot of good firms that do that, then there's possibility that all your innovation can be published and given away for free. So anything that can be legally reverse engineered should be considered for patenting. And then if there's an algorithm, artificial intelligence, say in the cloud, that's in a secure server, that would be illegal to access to reverse engineer. That is a good candidate for trade secrets. So having a combination of trade secrets and patents is usually very advisable, for example, for SaaS companies.
Yeah, I'll maybe answer that from a bit different perspective. I think Natalie's got some great the practical pieces, but I'll maybe suggest when you think about, when you want to do trade secrets versus patents and what are the different ways, I think this goes back to our other comments. You really need to understand why you need IP and how you need to use it. And I think that helps inform discussions when you have conversations with like Natalie Giroux on the call today to say, well, this is what my business use of that IP right is going to be. What is the best way to protect it? Because sometimes there's layered rights or lattice rights, and it gives a better boundaries for service providers to really help. I think understanding, you talk about people always, when I talk with startups and I say, what do you want to do with your IP? And they say, we want to license it. I'm like, well, what does that mean to you? Does that mean you're packaging up your know-how? So, Max talked about the talent piece and the trade secret piece. You're packaging up, you want to be able to do enforcement. You want to be able to sue somebody, which means you're going to need patent litigation grade patents, which is very different. And it's a slightly different approach in building a whole portfolio. So I think, there are the practical pieces that get layered across it, which Natalie started to give some examples of, but that needs to be coupled with a good understanding of what you need to do for your business and how that needs to be done. That goes back to your comment, about business strategy and IP strategy are kind of the same thing, right? And I think the layer that some people don't really realize is IP sometimes is a long game. Patents are 20 years life. Trade secrets are in perpetuity. So you're planning for not only tomorrow, but for 5 years down the road for your exit plans. I've worked with some organizations where I helped them, we got some patents in place strategically, and they weren't used for litigation for 12 years. But when they needed them, they had them on tap and they were incredibly effective, but they were created for a specific purpose, knowing they were being positioned to be held to retain a marketplace that the company was going to go into in 5 to 7 years. So I think this is where, working with your strategist to really unpack where your business needs to be in several time layers helps you prepare for that. Going back to the diligence question, it means you can make sure you own the right IP and you've got the path laid out. So when a group like VDC comes into diligence, you've already got it packaged and ready to go in your data room, and it's very easy to get through the diligence comparatively later. So just a different way to think about patents versus trademarks or trade secrets is you need to really articulate what your business intent is in many time zones, and then work backwards with a strategist on the best opportunities for you.
And one thing that's really important is that to catalog the trade secrets as they're found. A lot of people, they just do nothing when they don't patent. But having a simple Excel spreadsheet cataloging all the different trade secrets brings a lot of value and can impress investors as well.
Mm-hmm. And I'll maybe add one piece to build on Natalie's comment about cataloging the trade secrets. That process, and I'm sure Max might have some comments on it, but that process by default forces you to understand, do you actually own your trade secrets? So I think a lot about data. When I help companies with diligence or I've worked through them, when I read through their contracts with their clients, I'm like, you actually don't own the thing you think you own because your contracts are not structured appropriately. So that activity of working, having that trade secret package set up and a registry set up forces you to do checks and balances, which is going to help you in diligence down the road. I've heard, I think one of the phrases I've heard in the past is IP hygiene. I think Mike talks about that in some of his other talks is, do you have the right processes in place? So when you do diligence later on, it's going to make life easy.
Mm-hmm. And I'd just add on to that, it's very, very helpful if the company is coachable and open to really implementing some of the changes that you find during due diligence, whether you end up making an investment or not. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, we would want them to improve the processes or get to a stage where it is more appropriate for us to make an investment.
I actually want to jump off there, returning to a point that Natalie had made, keeping your trade secrets in an Excel sheet. I understand what you're saying. It's very helpful and beneficial to the company to be able to point to your trade secrets and say, look, here they are. Look how fancy and great they are. But maintaining trade secrets can prove a technological challenge for companies, right? Like I think we had been discussing in our preparatory call, I know there are companies who are more than willing to bring in interested parties and show them the new fancy bit bobs and doohickeys, right? Like you do want to show these things off, but in doing so, there are risks of having those trade secrets let out into the public. And as we all know, once the trade secret has left the proverbial barn, there's no getting that horse back in. So in your experience in working with startup companies, what base level considerations should these companies be making to ensure that such proprietary information isn't accidentally making its way out into the public know-how?
Yeah, I think that's it.
I'll start with Max, and then whoever else wants to hop in and be appreciated.
Yeah, I think the first point would be lock the door. I've gone a couple of times to companies, offices, and labs, and have been able to get in just by opening the door. They didn't have a lock, or if they did, it was unlocked because people were out to lunch. But really, the basics: knowing who you're talking to, making sure you've done your due diligence, you can verify the individuals that you're talking to, and you have some sort of paper trail at least to make sure that you've taken appropriate steps, have a non-disclosure agreement, and outline what you've discussed, and try to be as high level as possible with disclosing as little information as needed to educate your investors or whoever may be looking at it.
I think there's a lot to do with education as well. So trade secret can leak easily through any employees. So making sure that every employee has some kind of healthy paranoia about losing any kind of IP is essential. Making sure they don't leave stuff on whiteboards at night that can be taken. And I just wanted to clarify, the catalog of trade secret doesn't disclose the secret itself, but what it is. So just the titles and stuff. So even if that catalog gets lost or leaked, it wouldn't disclose all the how they work. So
I'll maybe add some pieces there. Just to build on Max's, I worked, just a practical example, I worked with one company a long time ago. They have production facilities, and to get in to have conversations, you needed a massive NDA sign. But if you wanted a tour of the building, which included production, we had a 4x6 card that had a very simple NDA on it that nobody could reasonably read and say they didn't understand it, and they had to sign it before they went through production line. Right. So there are, I think, the locking the door piece, but okay, if people come into your building and you don't have an NDA and they want to see what's on someone's desk because they're walking by it, how do you do that? And there's some simple ways. Maybe two other practical pieces to build on Natalie's. the biggest gap I see in most companies is employee onboarding and offboarding. Like when an employee leaves, make sure they sign something that they understand what their rights were when they leave. When someone comes into an organization, make sure they sign something saying they're not bringing a trade secret with them. I've done diligence on companies. When I look at their R&D staff, I'm like, you hired them from a competitor. I have no idea what they brought. You didn't have anything coming in. You have risk, significant risk for this senior hire. And we all think back to the Waymo trade secret lawsuit that happened with Google, and how the Waymo employee walked out the door and took all their IP with them, and effectively started his own organization. So that's a simple thing. And NDA scopes, the education piece, educate them. Okay, we're talking about this, but does our NDA cover this? Because sometimes it doesn't. And I think that education and the front door piece are great points to add.
Yeah, just to loop back to what Natalie said at the beginning, documenting isn't just about documenting, it's also about making choices and consciously. Sometimes people, especially in the SaaS world, will say, yeah, my algorithms are trade secrets and my front end UI stuff is going to be patented. That's great. But if you aren't documenting what those algorithms are, that goes through conscious choices that you're going to do a trade secret for that, or you're going to file a patent on it for various different strategic reasons. And going through that process also allows you to think through how you can best protect those trade secrets if they are protectable. Because as said, if it's reverse engineerable or detectable outside, then it isn't actually a trade secret. And I would just add, on the documentation side, it does provide a document for the investors to understand. And it also, as you're disclosing things to customers and explaining why your product is so good, those are things you're not going to disclose. You're going to disclose the results of those algorithms potentially, but not the actual innards of the algorithms themselves.
Absolutely. And I appreciate, I just want to go back, I appreciate both Natalie's just making clear that we're not actually talking about putting all of our trade secrets into a single Excel document. I guess that was for illustrative purposes only. Please don't, keep your secret sauce in a single document that can be emailed to anybody. With the remaining time, this is a question that I know I get from my clients all the time in the film and television industry, but I was hoping that you could speak to developing the lattice that we have been speaking about for the past 25 minutes. When a client comes to you, or even in your own personal ventures, want to incorporate open source software into this lattice, what are some of the considerations that you're making in undertaking this and in deciding to use open source? I know from my experience, always consult with your lawyer to look at the nature of the license that this material is being made under, but beyond the strict legal considerations, what considerations are you making to turn to open source? I'll start with
definitely the risks involved and understanding how the communities can be combined. So we invested in a companies way back where they were just about to get acquired by Siemens, and just about when the deal was going to close, Siemens ran an audit of their code, found different communities of open source that were in conflict. The company had never taken the time to make sure they were conforming to the copyright licenses, and the deal was canceled. So it had a huge impact on that company and on us as investors.
Yeah, open source licenses are not all the same, and you really need to know what terms you're agreeing to when you include any open source into your product. It's critical. It'll be part of due diligence for sure on any investment or exit. So it's something that you need to deal with as you're incorporating it. And some licenses are great and some aren't. It's a short story.
Yeah, I would add, understand the rights is really important. I think not all open sources licenses are the same. And my last comment would be, what is your other fallback right? Right? Where's your trade secret piece? You have to, if you're purely relying on open source, what is the other thing that you're protecting your value with, and have that discussion with an IP strategist or something. I think it should be part of the IP conversation, but not your only standalone piece for the most part.
Okay. Well, I do believe that takes us to the end of our presentation. I want to thank all of the panelists for their assistance and their valuable insight. I would also I'll turn the screen back over to Naomi, and thank you all for joining us today.